All right, guys. So today I want to talk to you guys about the Lightning Mage. Now, the Lightning Mage is probably one of the most damage efficient out of all of the mages. And what I mean by that is that most of the Lightning Mage's gear is going to have intelligence and dexterity. And a lot of the skills that you're using are going to utilize intelligence and dexterity to not only cap out your crit chance, but to push your crit damage up even higher. Meaning all your extra points are just going to go straight into might. Now, one thing to note is that Lightning does have lower scaling damage on their skills, but that's because everything you wear is giving you crit and crit damage, right? As well as if you're speccing the same way that we are, your intelligence as you start to get into tier 3 gear is going to go well above 100, and you're basically going to get an excessive amount of crit damage. Probably, I would say, roughly around 600 plus, maybe even low 700s when you're fully kitted out. Now, with that being said, though, with all this excessive dexterity that we're getting from our gear, as you notice, we're in only tier 2 gear at this current moment. But as we start to fill in the gear appropriately, we'll probably be changing out the Violent Topaz ring with a Ring of Power or a Ring of Cunning. And then not only that, this pendant, even though this is a very sexy pendant, we're going to turn this into a green dragon necklace. And that's because once we can get a tier 3 version of that, we're going to get a massive damage increase. It'll be about 1,000 more damage on the top and low end for each of these abilities. And you can imagine how insane that would be on the energy cannon. Now, let's go ahead and hop into the skills real quick, and we'll talk about why we went into what we've gone into, right? So, we'll start off with all the extra stuff. So, the reason we go into fire is because we want 1 extra range on our non-melee abilities, as well as we're getting 20% extra damage. Now, this makes sense because we have a low base damage on our abilities, and we want to be able to increase that. And the higher your base damage, that means when you do crit, which is 100%, you're going to be dealing a higher damage overall more often. And that obviously transitions into massive amounts of deeps. And you're probably not seeing the massive amounts of deeps yet, or DPS. And that's because you haven't seen where we're speccing into Lightning and where we're getting all this extra damage from. Now, the extra damage we're going to be getting, the most value out of is going to be our Thunderstruck. So, Thunderstruck, your lightning damage has a 10% chance to conjure a Thunderbolt on a random enemy, dealing 1,200 to 1,600 damage within 2 hexes. So, if all the enemies are stacked up, that Thunderstruck is going to strike, and then it's going to keep striking repeatedly over and over and over until the procs run out. Now, not only that, in this build, our character is going to be running the Thunderstone Staff, and the Thunderstone Staff also has a 20% chance to let off a Thunderbolt. Unfortunately, this one only procs once, but that's better than, better than not proccing at all, right? So this is going to be your best in slot for your Lightning Mage as well. They did nerf this because this build is one of the better builds after all, right? For mages, it's going to have the highest output of damage, and that is because of Thunderstruck, right? And Thunderstruck as you're going to see, procs a massive amount. Energy cannon, which, you know, if you're hitting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people in a row, Thunderstruck's going to have a 10% chance to hit up to 10 times on each target. And you just see the numbers flying like crazy, right? Very cool. Very awesome. Like, when you see the numbers, you're like, wow, you know, it's mind-blowing how much damage you see flying off of just this simple little cast right here. Now, we spec into Dazzling Darts. This is like our downtime, you know, ability. When we've used all of our big cooldowns, this one's going to be up sooner than they will be, which is also going to proc into recharges and hopefully lower the cooldowns on our Thunder Wrath and our Energy Cannon and the Twister. Now, the Twister is a close range ability as well, which is not a big deal. But this is also going to apply crippled to enemies that are nearby you. So you can basically throw this at them and then you can walk away. And they should not be able to close the gap on you, right? Pretty cool, not going to lie. Now, we also go into Stormbringer 1 and 2, which is going to give us 13% more crit rate. You might not even need to go into Stormbringer 1 and Stormbringer 2. You probably put these into other damage skills, or maybe say you want Teleport Self or even Teleport Other. There's so many different things that you can get value out of. You could even go for more damage from Warmonger as well as Wanderer for an extra movement, and then try to get another point squeezed out for Warmonger 2. These are all viable options if you want to increase the overall damage. Because once you get into in-game gear, this 13% crit can easily be taken away and replaced with all that extra dex from your tier 3 gear once you get into it, right? And then you'll find that you won't necessarily need all of these as much as you did before, right? Really cool. Now, another cool thing too is, you know, we go into Energy Shield, you got 50% is going to go into mana instead of health when you're dealt damage. You're also going to have Heavy Rains, which is going to increase your crit chance and crit damage even more based off of the intelligence you have. And once you get into tier 3, once again, that's going to keep making your crit rate and crit damage rise. So that's another reason why you can possibly spec out of Stormbringer and min-max into a better, stronger, more damage efficient build. Now, I haven't picked up Chain Lightning because a lot of times you run into issues where there's not 5 units or there's not 2 units, and it would only basically just do damage to 1 unit because everything is so spread out, right? So a lot of people may ask, well, why aren't you speccing into Chain Lightning? And that's the answer. It's because sometimes you don't have enough enemies for it to have the full potential that you normally would, right? Now, we also go into Thunder Wrath. Now, this has a very, very big AoE. And not only that, it's a large AoE that randomly strikes, but it has a huge blast radius for each of those little lightning or thunderbolts that hit. That is very strong. Very, very strong. On top of that, we got Conduit so that we have 2 turns every turn. We already went over Thunderstruck and how amazing that is. And then Energy Cannon, this is your bread and butter for when multiple enemies are all stacked up. In level 70, in a 6-man party, this will do about 1/3 of the lives of most of the mobs, right? And those mobs are about 700k HP, and with my tier 2 gear, we're doing enough to usually get them down 1/3 of their life, so about 200k. Granted, once this character is on CDs, like all your abilities are on cooldowns, it gets kind of rough. So if you're not proccing recharge cooldowns, your damage does fall off a little bit when you're between cooldowns. And that's okay. That's normal with mage classes until balancing comes at a later date. Just keep that in mind when you are playing mages, that the damage output right now is scaled down quite a bit, because in the earlier gameplay, you do much more damage than your melee counterparts. And then once you start to get gear for the melee counterparts, because early on, mages have a much easier time. Melee just ends up dying a lot until they get into good gear. Once they get into good gear, they start to outshine quite a bit, especially once they get into tier 1 and tier 2 gear. The melee just shoots up, because they're not really capped on the damage that they can do through their weapons, right? So if you were to look at my staff right here, my staff does 1,600 to 2,100 damage, whereas all of my abilities do significantly less. And because these are spells and they're not directly affected by my weapons damage, we are very limited on the damage that we output. Whereas if I were to just do regular staff attacks, I hit actually pretty hard compared to some of these abilities, right? Pretty crazy. But that is something to be aware of when you're playing a caster and you're level 70 plus, when you're trying to grind out tier 3. You have to understand that there are limitations to your builds, because you only get damage based off of your might, your spell power, and the added damage to the certain damage type that you're running, right? So if I'm running lightning, I'm adding lightning damage. We're also adding percentage lightning damage as well. These are the things you're going to be focusing on all of your armor and your weapons and stuff like that. Now, you can also roll off the crit chance, that 10% crit chance on your necklace and your rings for other things if you hit that cap. Once you start to get your gear tiered out, then you can find extra resistances and or whatever movement, distance that you want to cast from. You can do whatever you want with your accessories once you start to maximize your crit without the need for it, right, through your other means or other gear. Now we're going to go back to talking about the skills. So one other thing you're going to notice is that we end up speccing into light. Now we go into regenerate because it's 0 AP cost and only 62 mana to cast it. Not a big deal. This could top us off if we get damaged a little bit, or maybe help save someone that may be close to dying. Maybe they got poison on them and we're able to counter that with a little bit of health. Now this says 236 per turn, but it's going to crit, so keep that in mind, guys. This spell says it heals very low, but it's going to crit heal for a couple K, or whatever 500% of this is, 4,000, 2,000 to 4,000 per turn is what you're going to be healing. Now, we also get a 25% reduction in mana costs on all of our abilities, because we are speccing into light, and we're going to go into glory as well, so that when we do receive fatal damage, we can stay alive. This is kind of the cool thing about this build, is we have enough flexibility through lightning that we have the ability to afford a luxury spell like glory, which is a passive that saves you. That is amazing. You don't get that with every build. Some builds cannot reach that depth and have good damage as well, right? We also go into Light's Strength, which is going to increase our might by 20%, as well as Light's Clarity, which is also going to give us a little bit more dex. And you could probably actually respec Dexterity elsewhere. You could probably go for a Seal of Might, which would give you 30% more damage. You wouldn't have to be standing next to your enchanter or whoever else would be normally buffing. You can move on your own throughout the map and still get that luxury 30% extra damage, right? Really awesome, really cool. And then the last point that we put in is going to be Call of the Grave. Now, you're probably wondering, why would you go Call of the Grave? Well, when enemy's health is below 50%, guess what? You're going to be doing 20% extra damage. And when you're doing a ability like Energy Cannon, when you're doing those 10 hits in a row, if you reach that threshold under 50%, now you just got a free 20% extra damage on each hit after that, which is going to further increase that sweet, sweet damage that you're already doing, right? So Lightning Mage is pretty much my favorite class outside of the Fire. I love the Fire Mage. So let's go ahead and talk about best in slot weapons. Now, your best in slot weapon, as we said before, is going to be your Thunderstone Staff. This is a very, very good staff. Even though it got nerfed to a Thunderbolt for only once per turn, I mean, that Thunderbolt is still going to hit for roughly around 10-20k. I really can't complain about that. I don't think anyone would. And like I said, as you start to get, tier 3, you're going to be increasing that damage by much more. Like, we are just in tier 2 gear with one tier 3 accessory. If we're able to finally get the other pieces that we need, we can get so much more damage out of this build than what we already have. So let's go ahead and talk about best in slot for your helmets. And the best in slot is going to be the Thunder Hat. Now, unlike the Fire build where you have the luxury Mystic helmets, you do not have any Mystics in the Thunder category that do lightning damage, or in the Lightning category, I mean. Or they haven't released anything yet for that. Maybe they will later on down the road. We'll just have to wait and see, right? Since I've started playing this game, they have added quite a few different new weapons and armor and all kinds of accessories, which is it's added to wanting to add to different builds. But as I've said before, balancing is the only thing that keeps people from experimenting with all these different builds at the end game level. So the Thunder Hat is going to be your #1 priority to work on, especially if you can get that at tier 2. As you saw, we don't have the Thunder Hat yet. We are currently rocking Talix horns, so we're actually losing out on 5% lightning damage if it was just the regular level 30 helmets, right? Where we're at right now, our helmets currently at 54%. So that would be a lot higher if we had the legendary version, which is the Thunder Hat. Now, let's move on to the chest pieces, and the best in slot is going to be your Thunder Robes. Thunder Robes also are going to give you a lightning shield whenever you're struck. It may also be bugged, just like the Fire Robes, to where whenever you do damage, you get the lightning shield. It's been a while since I've had Thunder Robes on my character because I have not found any that are tier 1 or above. So it's hard to justify wearing them when the damage shields they're kind of meh, you know what I'm saying? Because they don't really add to your damage, they just send damage back. And 9 out of 10 times, if you are getting hit in level 70 plus, you're probably dying in one shot unless you're being buffed by an enchanter with extra shields to mitigate damage, and or maybe you have a warlock who gives you, dark ritual. But this is your best in slot. The Thunder Robes will be your best in slot for chest piece. And we also have the Talix garments, which is what we're currently wearing right now. It caps out at 54% lightning damage and plus 80 to lightning when you do have it fully upgraded. So at tier 2. So when it gets to being the legendary version, it's going to be significantly higher, as I said before. Really cool. We're going to move on to the rings. Just like with the Fire Mage, you've got multiple rings that are going to be viable for your build. Thunderstone ring is going to be the best in slot because it gives dexterity as well as a high percentage of lightning damage. And then if you were to go on to your next best in slot, your Ring of Power, because you're going to be capped on dexterity fairly early with this build. Well, not fairly early, but you're going to have more leeway in what you can put on the build because you're not going to need that 96 dex that you're getting from the level 3 necklace or the ring. You could probably fill that in and get more value out of the Ring of Power, right? Because the Ring of Power is going to give you 96% more damage. Currently, I do think the Ring of Power will be best in slot. But with that being said, the Ring of Power, the Ring of Cunning, you've got the Abyssal Binding, which is going to fall off earlier on. You've also have the Orculum Band, all viable rings that you can use. The Topaz Ring will be roughly around, the one we currently have on is 30% damage at tier 2. So it will be viable for a little bit, at least until you get to the point where you have something that's going to give you more value and damage. But this ring right here, the Topaz Ring, because it doesn't have any base stats on it, it's very limited in how useful it's going to be for you at end game, right? But you can totally use it. I mean, we're using it right now. So let's go ahead and move on to the amulets. Amulets, same thing. The Dragon Eye amulet is probably best in slot. And the reason I say that is because it's going to give you plus 1,000 to all of your skills, right? So if all your spells get plus 1,000 damage, there's nothing that is going to do more damage than that. The Green Dragon Eye is going to be your best in slot, hands down. If it's giving you 1,000, I mean, your energy cannon is going to be doing 1,500 with what mediocre gear I have on right now. The top end is 1,500. I mean, times 10, that's already 15k damage before your crit damage is added into there, right? And if you're looking at end game builds, you're looking at probably roughly around 600 to 700% increased crit damage, maybe even more if you can min-max it more, you know, depending on what your stats can get to at that point. Once you got that max of the max, you may be able to get more than that. It all varies on, you know, what you're able to find when you're in raid, because tier 3 does take a while to get, and I mean, it is very RNG. You know, doesn't matter how many runs you've done. I've got 300 hours in the game, which may not sound like a lot to a lot of you guys, but I would say roughly around 200 of those hours are straight farming and target farming dungeons. And the amount of tier 3s I've got is a lot lower than you would think, because at level 70 on a hardcore account, where I'm not trying to lose all my characters and all my progression, I won't go very much higher than that. So I'm only getting a 10% chance to get said items, right? We have the Abyssal Chain, which is another viable option, as well as the Orichalcum Chain and the Amulet of Power, as well as the Pendant of Cunning. Now, these are all items that I would prefer to use if I do not have access to the Green Dragon Eye. And a lot of people would say, well, you should be able to get access to the Green Dragon Eye, at least the basic one. You could farm the level 31 pretty easily. It's when you get to tier 1, tier 2, where the dragons start to get very hard. And they've changed the mechanics, so a lot of those dragons do a lot of weird different things than they used to do. I don't generally touch the dragons because I am a hardcore player and I don't want to lose my progression. So We will try to revisit them as much as possible, but as of right now, I just don't feel comfortable with it. All right, guys, so this is where we're going to end it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you guys think on these builds.